chosen one, they just made the biggest mistake of their entire life. And the terrifying part is, they don't even know it yet. They crossed you. They looked right at you, decided you were an easy target, and pushed forward like there would never be a bill for it. No hesitation, no second thought. Just confidence built on the belief that nothing would ever come back on them. That's the mistake. Not the moment they crossed you, the moment after, when they walked away like it was already over, like you'd just absorb it and disappear quietly into the background of their story. They don't know karma already wrote their name down. They don't know the debt is already collecting interest. They don't know the exact consequence they never saw coming is already in motion, and there is nothing left they can do to stop it. They thought you were the safe one to test, the quiet one, the one who wouldn't fight back, wouldn't expose them, wouldn't make it a thing. They picked you because they believed you'd take it and keep moving, because that's what you always did before. But something they never accounted for was watching the entire time, keeping score in a ledger they can't see and can't argue with. It doesn't care about their excuses. It doesn't care about their reputation. It only cares about the debt. And right now, chosen one, that debt is due. Somewhere, right now, they're going about a normal day. Coffee, traffic, small talk, acting like the moment they crossed you was small enough to forget. That's the part that should sit heavy with you, not with worry, with certainty. Because the size of their comfort right now is exactly the size of the surprise waiting on the other side of it. They think the story already ended. It didn't. It just went quiet. And quiet is where karma does its best work. You might wonder why you're even still thinking about this if you've already let it go. That's not you holding on. That's your instinct recognizing something unfinished, the way you'd notice a door left slightly open in a room you thought was locked. You're not obsessing, you're sensing. And that sense has never once been wrong about people like this. You've probably replayed the moment more than once. Not because you're weak for it, but because something in you already understood, long before you had the words for it, that this wasn't just a moment that happened and disappeared. It was a moment that started something, and the part of you that keeps returning to it isn't stuck, it's watching, the same way you'd watch a horizon after seeing the first flicker of lightning far off in the distance. Before we go any further, hit like and subscribe. Not for me, for the message. Every like is a signal back into the universe that says this story needs to reach the next person standing exactly where you're standing right now, wondering if crossing them will really cost anything. It will. Let's talk about how. Here's the part they can't process yet. Karma doesn't announce itself at the door. It doesn't knock, it doesn't warn, it doesn't give a grace period. It moves in silence, the same way you moved in silence when they crossed you and you said nothing. They mistook your silence for surrender. It was never surrender. It was the exact moment the universe started building their reckoning, brick by brick, behind a door they don't know exists yet. And chosen one, that door is about to open. Number one, the line they didn't know they were crossing. They thought this was small, a jab, a betrayal, a cheap shot they could walk away from clean. What they didn't understand is that some lines aren't drawn by people, they're drawn by something bigger, something that doesn't care how confident they looked when they crossed it. The moment they made their move against you, they weren't just making a choice about you, they were making a choice about themselves, about what they were willing to become to get a moment of satisfaction at your expense. And that choice doesn't get erased just because they've moved on and stopped thinking about it. Think about how sure they were, how easy it felt to them. They probably laughed about it afterward, told the story to someone else, made themselves the hero of a version that made you the punchline. It wasn't even a big deal, they probably said, more than once, to more than one person, until saying it enough times started to feel true even to them. That's how people who cross others usually operate. They rewrite the moment so it doesn't sit heavy on them. But rewriting a story doesn't rewrite the debt. It just delays the moment they have to face what they actually did. And delay isn't the same thing as escape. Imagine a person walking across a frozen lake, tapping their foot on the ice just to prove they can, laughing when it holds. They don't hear the crack starting 3 feet under them because the crack doesn't happen where the foot lands. It happens somewhere else first, quiet, invisible, spreading. That's what crossing you did. It didn't shatter anything in the moment. It started a fracture they can't see yet, running underneath everything they think is solid ground. You might be asking yourself why it still stings, even though you didn't react. Why the moment replays. That's not weakness, chosen one. That's your body remembering something your mind already forgave. And here's the truth they'll never say out loud. They crossed you because they believed you had no protection, no backing, no consequence waiting on the other side of it. They were wrong about all three. The line is drawn. The debt is real, and nothing about the way this ends is up to them anymore. Ever wonder why some people can cross you and sleep fine that same night? It's not because they're free of it, it's because the bill hasn't arrived yet. And people who haven't seen the bill always assume there isn't one. They will. Not because you send it, because it was already written the moment they decided your pain was worth their momentary satisfaction. Some debts take a night to collect. This one was never going to be that simple, and somewhere underneath their confidence, they already suspect that. There's a version of them that knows exactly what they did. It shows up at 3 in the morning, uninvited, when the distractions are gone and the room is quiet enough that the story they tell everyone else doesn't work on themselves anymore. That version doesn't get to talk during the day when the audience is watching and the performance has to hold. But it's still in there, keeping its own private record, separate from the one they show the world, and eventually the two records stop matching each other loudly enough for even them to notice. Number 2. Why they underestimated the storm they woke up. There's a specific kind of arrogance that comes from crossing someone who never raises their voice. People assume quiet means empty. They assume calm means weak. They assume that if you didn't explode the moment they hurt you, there's nothing behind the silence worth fearing. That assumption is the reason they're about to learn the hardest lesson of their life, because they built their entire confidence on a version of you that was never real. They didn't see the storm because storms don't announce themselves while they're forming. They gather pressure quietly, out over open water, invisible until the moment the sky turns the wrong color and it's already too late to prepare. That was you the whole time they were crossing you, laughing at you, testing how far they could push, gathering, building, not planning revenge, just becoming the version of yourself that doesn't get caught off guard twice. Here's what's uncomfortable for them to sit with. They keep waiting for you to react the old way. They keep expecting the explosion, the confrontation, the scene they can point to and say, "See, they're the problem." But you're not giving them that, and the longer you don't, the more unstable they become, because their whole story depends on you playing your old role. When you stop playing it, the story falls apart in their hands. Picture someone standing outside in what they think is a light drizzle, refusing to come in, mocking anyone who warns them. They don't know the drizzle is the outer edge of something enormous still building offshore. By the time they realize what's actually coming, it's already on top of them, and running for shelter does nothing because there is no shelter left to reach. That is exactly the position they put themselves in the second they crossed you and assumed it was over. Maybe you've asked yourself why you didn't just say something back in the moment, why you let it go instead of matching their energy right there. Here's why. Matching them would have made you part of their weather. Staying calm made you the pressure system they never saw building above their heads. You're not owed an apology to move forward. and you're not required to want one. What you are owed is what's already coming, whether they ever say sorry or not. They underestimated the storm because they never once considered that the calm was the storm, patiently deciding when it was time to make landfall. And storms that take their time building are always the ones that leave the most behind when they finally arrive. There's a reason meteorologists fear the slow-moving systems more than the fast ones. A fast storm hits and passes, does its damage, and clears out within hours. A slow one sits over the same ground for days, dropping more than any structure was built to hold, because it was never in a hurry to leave. That's the kind of storm they woke up in you. Not the loud kind. The kind that stays exactly where it needs to stay until the ground underneath them has nowhere left to drain. Number 3. The debt karma never forgets. People love to believe karma is optional, a nice idea for greeting cards. Something that only applies to other people. The ones who cross you almost always believe this the hardest, because believing it lets them sleep at night after doing something they know, somewhere underneath the noise, was wrong. But karma isn't a belief system. It's closer to a ledger, and ledgers don't care what anyone believes about them. They just balance. What makes this specific debt dangerous for them is that it wasn't a single transaction. It wasn't one moment of crossing you and one clean consequence waiting to cancel it out. It's compounding. Every time they told the story wrong to make themselves look better, every time they smiled at you like nothing happened, every time they let someone else believe the version where you were the problem, they added another line to the account. They think they got away with it because nothing happened immediately. That's not innocence. That's interest accruing. Imagine someone taking small amounts from an account they think no one is watching, convinced that because the withdrawals are small, no one will ever notice the total. They keep taking, keep smiling, keep telling themselves it's fine because nothing's happened yet. Then one day, the account is called in all at once, and the number is so much bigger than they remember taking because they forgot. Debts grow quietly while you're not looking at them. They crossed you assuming the debt would never come due, that you were the kind of person who absorbs things and lets them vanish. But debts don't vanish just because the person who's owed them stays quiet. If anything, silence gives a debt more room to grow, because nobody's rushing to collect early. You didn't forgive it by not reacting, you let it mature. Why does it feel like nothing has happened yet, even though you know something is coming? Because maturity takes time, chosen one, and the biggest debts are always the slowest ones to come due. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the system working exactly the way it's supposed to. And chosen one, here's the part that should settle deep in your chest. You don't have to collect this debt yourself. You don't have to plan it, orchestrate it, or lift a single finger. The universe doesn't need your help balancing its own books. All you have to do is keep living your life clean, while their account keeps growing heavier. Every single day, they pretend none of this happened. That's the quiet cruelty of it for them. They're the only ones still pretending the math doesn't exist. Think about how exhausting it must be to keep a ledger you're constantly trying not to look at. That's what avoidance costs a person over time. Not peace, just distraction dressed up as peace. A temporary numbness that has to be renewed every single day because the account never actually closes on its own. You don't carry that exhaustion. They do. Every single morning, whether they admit it to themselves or not. Number 4. Every lie they told became evidence against them. When people cross someone and get away with it in the moment, the next move is almost always the same. They lie about it. Not always a big dramatic lie, sometimes just a small twist, a softer version, a story where they're not quite as guilty as they actually were. They think a lie is protection. What they don't understand is that every lie they tell about what they did to you becomes another fingerprint left at the scene. Here's why that matters. A single lie is easy to maintain. Two lies require remembering both and making sure they never contradict each other. By the time someone has told the story 5, 6, 7 different ways to 5, 6, 7 different people, they've built a structure so unstable that one honest question from the wrong person collapses the entire thing. They crossed you once. They've been lying about it every day since. And every lie is one more piece of proof stacking against them in a case they don't even know is open. Picture a person building a house out of cards on a table that's slowly being shaken, so slightly they can't even feel it yet. Each lie is another card added to a structure that was never stable to begin with. They keep adding, keep balancing, keep believing it's holding. But structures built on lies don't fail gently. They fail all at once, and everyone in the room sees exactly what it was made of when it finally comes down. You don't need to correct their story. You don't need to defend yourself in rooms you weren't invited into. The people who matter eventually hear enough versions of the same lie to notice the cracks themselves, and once someone notices one crack, they start looking for more. That's not something you have to manufacture. That's just what happens when a story is built on something false and left standing long enough for people to actually look at it closely. Have you ever wondered why you never felt the need to correct their version, even when you heard it secondhand and knew it wasn't true? That wasn't passivity, that was patience with a purpose. Liars only get away with it while nobody's comparing notes. You already know the moment people start comparing notes, the whole story collapses on its own weight, and you never had to say a single word to make that happen. They thought lying about what they did to you would bury it. Instead, they built a paper trail with their own mouth, one conversation at a time, and paper trails always eventually get found. I never said that, they'll try one day, except too many people already heard the version before this one. A liar's biggest enemy was never a confrontation. It was always their own memory, and memory fades unevenly. Details shift, timelines blur. The version told in January stops matching the version told in October, and nobody has to catch them in the act for people to start noticing the seams. All it takes is one person overlapping in two rooms at two different times to hear two different truths. And once that happens, the whole story starts to feel less like a story and more like a performance nobody signed up to keep watching. Drop a 77 in the comments right now if you feel this hitting exactly where it needs to. Not for luck, chosen one, as a marker, a signal that you're still here, still watching this unfold, still ready for what's coming next. And if this message means something to you, the super thanks button keeps this mission alive so it can reach the next person who needs to hear it today. Number 5, the silence that was actually a countdown. They read your silence as surrender. That was their second mistake, right after crossing you in the first place. Silence, when it comes from someone who was actually hurt, isn't the absence of a response. It's the presence of a bigger one, still forming. They mistook the quiet for an ending. It was never an ending. It was the space between the lightning and the thunder, and thunder always arrives, even when you can't see the strike that caused it. Every day you didn't confront them, didn't explain yourself, didn't demand they acknowledge what they did. You weren't losing ground. You were letting the situation mature into something they couldn't argue their way out of. If you'd reacted the moment it happened, they would have had a story ready. Overreacting, dramatic, can't take a joke. Your silence took that story away from them before they even needed it, because there was nothing loud to point to, nothing messy to twist. Imagine a fuse burning slowly towards something they can't see, hidden underground, moving at its own pace regardless of how confident they feel standing at the other end of it. They can't hear it burning. They can't see how far it's traveled. All they know is that everything still looks fine on the surface, and that false sense of fine is exactly what makes the moment it reaches its target so much bigger than anything they were braced for. They've probably even mentioned to someone how relieved they are that you never made it a big deal. That relief is temporary, chosen one, and they don't know it yet. The silence wasn't you letting it go. It was you letting it grow into something too solid to talk your way around. Why didn't you say anything back then, even when everything in you wanted to? Because some part of you already knew that reacting would have handed them exactly the ending they wanted. A version where you looked unstable and they looked patient. You refused to give them that ending, so they got this one instead. The one where the silence was never peace at all. They're going to look back at this exact stretch of quiet and realize it was never peace. It was the countdown they never knew they were living inside, ticking down to a number they never bothered to check. Think about how differently a countdown reads depending on who's watching it. To them, right now, this looks like nothing. Just quiet days stacking on top of each other, no reason to expect anything different tomorrow than today. But a countdown doesn't announce itself to the person it's counting down on. It only becomes visible in the final seconds, and by then, there's no version of preparation left that actually helps. Number 6. Why their own circle started turning on them. People who cross someone rarely stop there. It becomes a pattern, a habit, a way of moving through the world that eventually gets turned on the people standing closest to them too. And that's exactly why the same circle that used to protect them is starting to feel less solid than it used to. You're not the only account that's overdue. You're just the one who happened to notice first. Here's what happens when someone crosses one person and gets away with it. They get bolder. They start cutting corners with other relationships too, assuming the same rules apply everywhere, assuming everyone around them will absorb it the same way they expected you to. But people notice patterns eventually. They notice when someone always has a slightly different version of every conflict they've ever been in. They notice when someone is always the victim in every story they tell, no matter who else was involved. Picture a person standing in the middle of a room they used to fill up completely. Only now the room feels a little emptier every time they walk into it. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody staged an intervention. People just quietly started giving a little more distance, answering a little slower, believing a little less. That distance doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a slow accumulation of moments where the mask slipped just enough for someone to see what was underneath it. You might wonder if you're supposed to feel something when this happens. Satisfaction, closure, anything at all. You don't have to feel anything. This part was never about you reacting. It's just what naturally happens to a pattern once enough people are standing close enough to see it repeat. They crossed you and thought it would stay contained to just the two of you. It never stays contained. Behavior like that leaks into every relationship a person has, and eventually the people around them start connecting dots they were never supposed to connect. That's not karma doing something dramatic. That's just the natural cost of being the kind of person who crosses people and calls it nothing. One version of the story stops matching another version, and suddenly the people who trusted them the most start asking questions out loud instead of just wondering quietly. There's always one person in every circle who takes longer to see it than everyone else, usually the closest one, the one who's invested the most in believing the good version. When that person finally sees it too, something shifts permanently because the last line of defense just switched sides. Once the closest ally starts asking the same questions everyone else has been asking quietly for months, there's no version of the story left that can hold its shape. Number 7. The moment their confidence became their downfall. Confidence isn't dangerous by itself. Misplaced confidence is. And what they're carrying right now, walking around like crossing you had no cost, is exactly that. Confidence built on a foundation that was never as solid as they believed. The very thing that let them cross you in the first place, the certainty that nothing would come back on them, is the same thing that's about to make their fall so much harder to absorb. People who believe they're untouchable stop being careful. They get sloppy. They stop covering their tracks as well as they used to because they've convinced themselves no one's checking. That overconfidence is exactly what creates the opening for everything to finally catch up. They didn't just cross you once carefully and stop. They kept going, kept pushing, kept assuming the pattern would hold forever because it had held for this long. Imagine someone walking a tightrope who stopped looking down years ago, not because they got better at balance, but because nothing bad has happened yet. Every step forward without consequence convinces them the rope is wider than it actually is. It isn't. It never was. The only thing keeping them up there is the fact that gravity hasn't caught up to their carelessness. But gravity always catches up. Have you noticed how the people who cross others the most casually are always the ones who seem the most shocked when it finally catches up with them? That shock isn't an accident. It's what happens to anyone who mistakes a lack of immediate consequence for an absence of consequence entirely. You don't need to push them off. That's the part they'll never understand about how this actually works. Their own confidence is doing the work for you, one careless step at a time. The same certainty that let them cross you without a second thought is the exact thing guaranteeing they won't see the fall coming until they're already in it. And the people who fall from the highest confidence always fall the hardest because they never built a single instinct for catching themselves. That's the part nobody warns overconfident people about. Falling isn't the dangerous part. Never having practiced falling is. Someone who's used to landing on their feet because life has been forgiving so far has never developed the reflexes to absorb an actual hit. So when the ground finally moves, it doesn't just knock them down, it takes far longer than it should for them to figure out how to stand back up. Number 8. How every attack became a boomerang. There's an old truth that people who cross others never seem to learn until it's too late. What you send out doesn't disappear, it circles back. Every attempt they made to diminish you, every dismissive comment, every quiet cruelty disguised as a joke, all of it was a boomerang they threw without ever checking where it would land on the way back. And chosen one, it's on its way back now. They probably felt powerful in the moment. Crossing someone, getting away with it clean, walking off like nothing happened, that feels like winning to people who measure winning by how little consequence they face. But that feeling is temporary by design. It's borrowed power, taken from someone else's pain, and borrowed things always eventually have to be returned, usually with something extra attached for the weight. Picture someone throwing a boomerang across an open field, watching it disappear over the tree line, satisfied, assuming it's gone for good. They walk away, forget about it, move on with their day. They don't hear it coming back around behind them, gaining speed, aimed exactly where they stood when they threw it. That's what's happening right now, while they go about their life like the moment they crossed you was closed and filed away forever. Why does it always seem to come back around exactly when someone least expects it? Because that's precisely when they've stopped watching for it. And anything that's been building for a long time hits hardest the moment a person has finally let their guard all the way down. You don't have to throw anything back. You never did. The exact energy they sent toward you is already circling around to find them again, and it's going to land with the same force they used when they let it go, except now it's had time and distance to build momentum they never accounted for. Nothing they threw at you actually left the sky. It just went quiet for a while. There's a strange comfort in understanding this part fully. You never had to become someone who keeps score, someone who plans a comeback, someone who spends their energy waiting for a moment of payback. That was never your job. You just had to keep being exactly who you already were, and the same motion they set into the world would find its way back to its source without any assistance from you at all. Number 9. The ones who warned them and got ignored. Somewhere along the way, someone probably told them This wasn't going to end well. A friend who saw the pattern. A conscience they talked themselves out of listening to. A quiet, uneasy feeling in their own chest they pushed down because acknowledging it would have meant admitting they were about to do something they couldn't take back. They ignored every one of those warnings, and that ignoring is its own kind of evidence. This matters because it strips away the excuse they're going to reach for eventually. They didn't cross you by accident. They didn't stumble into it without knowing better. Somewhere, someone or something tried to stop them before it happened, and they overrode it because the moment felt too satisfying to walk away from. That's not a mistake made in ignorance. That's a choice made in full awareness, dressed up afterward as an accident, because accidents are easier to forgive than decisions. Imagine someone standing at a crossing with the gate already coming down, lights flashing, every signal screaming to stop, and they gun the engine anyway because they're convinced they'll make it through in time. They don't hear the horn until it's already too close to matter. That's exactly the position they put themselves in the moment they decided crossing you was worth the risk, despite every warning telling them otherwise. Doesn't it change something, knowing they were warned and chose this anyway? This was never a story about someone who didn't know better. It's a story about someone who knew and did it anyway, betting that knowing better wouldn't matter once the moment had passed. You don't have to remind them they were warned. Whatever is coming for them will remind them on its own, in its own time, in a way that makes the warning impossible to keep pretending they never heard. Nobody told me, they'll say. Someone did. They just weren't listening for it. That's the pattern with almost everyone who crosses a line they shouldn't have. The warning was rarely subtle. It was rarely hidden. It usually came in plain language from someone who cared enough to say the uncomfortable thing out loud. What made it easy to ignore wasn't the warning itself. It was how badly they wanted the outcome the warning was trying to prevent. Wanting something enough will always make a person deaf to the one voice trying to save them from it. Number 10. Why karma doesn't forget an address. There's a specific kind of fear that settles into people who've crossed someone and gotten away with it clean, at least for a while. It shows up in small, strange ways. Checking their phone a little too fast when it buzzes. Feeling uneasy in rooms that used to feel safe. Reacting a little too strongly to things that shouldn't bother them. That unease isn't random. That's the early signal of something they can feel but can't name yet. Something that already knows exactly where to find them. Karma doesn't operate on forgiveness or forgetting the way people do. People move on because remembering everything is exhausting, because grudges are heavy to carry, because life is easier when old wounds get filed away. Karma isn't carrying anything. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't need to forgive to move forward because it was never burdened by the weight in the first place. It simply keeps an accurate record and waits for the correct moment to deliver it, undisturbed by how much time has passed. Imagine a house sitting empty for years, weeds growing over the front steps, paint peeling, looking abandoned to anyone who drives by without knowing better. Then one day, without warning, someone shows up with the deed in hand, because the address was never actually forgotten, just waiting for the right paperwork to clear. That's what's coming for them. The years of nothing happening weren't mercy. They were processing time. Have you ever noticed how the guiltiest people are often the ones who talk the most about how they've moved on? That's not peace, chosen one. That's rehearsal. They're practicing a version of the story where none of it happened, hoping if they say it enough times, the address on file finally changes. They've probably convinced themselves this is all behind them by now. That's the most dangerous place to be standing when karma finally arrives, because comfort makes consequence hit twice as hard. Karma doesn't forget an address, chosen one, and it never asks permission before it knocks. It doesn't call ahead. It doesn't check if it's a convenient time. It just shows up exactly when the illusion of safety is at its thickest. Think about how much harder a fall feels when it comes right after someone finally starts believing they're safe. If it landed early, while they were still bracing for it, it would sting less, because part of them would have already expected it. But it doesn't land early. It waits for the exact moment their guard drops completely, because that's when the weight of it actually registers. And that's not cruelty, that's just how consequence has always worked. Number 11. The collapse they can't explain to anyone. There's a particular kind of unraveling that happens to people who've crossed someone and built their entire footing on the assumption it would never surface. When it finally does start surfacing, it doesn't announce itself with a single clean blow. It shows up as a series of small failures they can't connect to each other. And that inability to explain what's happening is its own kind of punishment. Things that used to work for them stop working. Relationships that felt stable start feeling strained for reasons they can't quite name. Opportunities that used to come easily start slipping through their fingers. And every time they try to point to a single cause, there isn't one clean answer to grab onto. That's what a collapse built from accumulated consequence looks like from the inside. It doesn't come with a note explaining why. It just arrives piece by piece, until the person living through it feels like the ground itself has turned against them. Picture a building that's had its foundation quietly compromised for years, one crack at a time, invisible from the outside because the walls are still standing and the paint still looks fresh. Then one day, without any single dramatic event to point to, the whole structure starts to lean, and no one inside can explain what went wrong because the damage was never visible until it was already too far along to stop. Why can't they just fix it once they notice something's wrong? Because you can't repair a foundation from the inside while still pretending the crack was never there in the first place. Fixing it would mean admitting where it started, and that's the one thing they're not ready to do. They're going to feel this before they understand it. They're going to sense the ground shifting under a life they thought was solid, and they're going to search desperately for someone to blame, for a single moment to point to. There won't be one clean answer waiting for them. There will just be the accumulated weight of everything they thought they got away with, finally settling into place, quietly rearranging everything they built on top of it. They'll ask other people if they've noticed anything different lately, fishing for reassurance, hoping someone will say no, everything looks fine from the outside. And for a while, someone probably will, because most people don't announce what they've started to notice until they're certain of it. That gap between what people are starting to see and what they're willing to say out loud is exactly where a collapse like this lives the longest, before it finally becomes undeniable. Number 12. When their allies start disappearing. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who's built their life on crossing people and calling it nothing, and it always catches them off guard, even though it shouldn't. The people who used to back them, defend them, take their side without question, start quietly stepping back. Not all at once, not with an announcement, just one at a time, drifting a little further out of reach, until they look around one day and realize the room they used to command is a lot emptier than they remember it being. This isn't coincidence, and it isn't bad luck. People who cross others eventually cross the wrong person in front of the right witness, or they let their guard down enough for someone loyal to them to finally see the full pattern instead of just one flattering slice of it. Once that happens, loyalty starts to erode, quietly, the same way trust erodes anywhere, not with a single dramatic betrayal, but with a slow accumulation of moments that no longer add up the way they used to. Imagine someone standing on what they think is a crowded stage, performing the same story they've always performed, only to look out mid-performance and realize the seats have been emptying out one at a time, while they were too focused on their own reflection to notice. By the time they see how few people are still watching, the ones who left are already too far gone to bring back with an apology. Isn't it strange how nobody ever leaves loudly? People who finally see someone clearly rarely announce it. They just quietly stop making excuses for them, stop laughing as hard at their jokes, stop offering their number when someone new asks about them. That quiet withdrawal is louder than any confrontation could ever be. They crossed you, assuming their circle would never find out, or wouldn't care if they did. They were wrong on both counts, and the quiet exodus already happening around them right now is the first visible sign of a debt that's finally starting to get collected in public, one empty chair at a time. The cruelest part for someone like this is that the exodus never comes with an explanation attached. People don't send a message explaining exactly why they've pulled back. They just stop showing up the way they used to, and the person left behind is stuck guessing, replaying conversations, wondering what changed, when the honest answer was simple the entire time. Nothing changed. People just finally saw clearly what had always been there. Number 13. The reckoning they can't escape. Every version of this story that people who cross others tell themselves ends the same optimistic way in their own head. They got away with it. It's over. Nothing's coming. That comfortable ending is a lie they've been telling themselves for exactly as long as they've avoided facing what they actually did. And comfortable lies have a very specific shelf life. They expire right when the person telling them least expects it. A reckoning doesn't need permission to arrive, and it doesn't care how well someone has managed to convince themselves it isn't coming. It builds in the background while life looks normal on the surface, and then it shows up all at once, in a form that can't be negotiated with, explained away, or spun into a better story for someone else to hear. That's the nature of consequence that's been delayed rather than avoided. The delay isn't mercy, it's just timing, and timing is not something they get to control. Imagine someone sitting comfortably at a table, confident the bill will never come, laughing with people who don't know what they actually owe. Then the check arrives, and it's not just for the meal in front of them, it's for every course they ordered and forgot about over the years. All of it due at once, in front of everyone at the table who assumed they were simply enjoying a meal like everyone else. What happens to a person in the exact moment a reckoning like that lands? Not drama, not shouting, usually just a very long, very quiet silence, the kind where everyone at the table finally understands they were only ever seeing one version of the person sitting across from them. You don't have to be there when it happens. You don't have to orchestrate it, witness it, or even know the exact moment it lands. All you have to do is keep living your life with clean hands while the reckoning they've spent this entire time avoiding finally catches up to a debt that was never going anywhere, no matter how far they thought they'd outrun it. Some people spend years running from a bill they know is coming, changing rooms, changing stories, changing the people around them, hoping a new setting will make the old debt disappear. It never does. A reckoning doesn't care how many new rooms someone walks into. It only cares about finding the person who owes it, and it has never once failed to find them eventually, no matter how far or how fast they thought they were moving. Number 14. Why the people who once defended them are going quiet. There was a time they never had to explain themselves. Someone would jump in first. A friend, a sibling, a co-worker who'd shut down anyone who dared question them. That kind of automatic defense feels like armor, and for a while it works exactly like armor, deflecting anything that gets close. But armor only holds as long as the person wearing it hasn't been seen clearly by the very people holding it up. And that's exactly what's starting to happen now. The ones who used to defend them without a second thought are starting to hesitate. Not because someone convinced them, not because you said a single word, but because they've started noticing the same pattern you noticed a long time ago. A version of events that doesn't quite line up. A story that changes slightly depending on who's in the room. A comment made once, then denied entirely, then half admitted when the pressure gets specific enough. People who defend blindly eventually run out of blind spots. Picture a lawyer standing in front of a jury, confident, polished, defending a client they believed in completely, only to be handed evidence mid-trial that contradicts everything they've already told the room. The confidence doesn't disappear instantly. It cracks first, in the pause before the next sentence, in the way their eyes flick toward their client for reassurance that isn't coming. That flicker is happening right now in the people who used to defend them without blinking. Why does that hesitation matter so much if nobody's saying anything out loud yet? Because hesitation is where doubt lives before it becomes a decision. The moment someone stops defending automatically and starts defending carefully, the outcome is already decided. They just haven't said it out loud yet. They're going to notice their strongest supporters getting quieter in rooms where they used to be the loudest. They're going to notice fewer people rushing to their defense the next time something comes up. That's not disloyalty, chosen one. That's people finally being allowed to see what was always there, once the noise around it stopped being loud enough to hide it. A defender who goes quiet rarely comes back loud again. Once someone sees the gap between the story they were told and the story that's actually true, they can't unsee it, no matter how much they might want to, for the sake of an old friendship or an old loyalty. The silence that replaces their old defense isn't neutral. It's the sound of someone quietly deciding they're done being used as a shield for something they no longer believe in. Number 15. Why this is only the beginning of their ending. Here's the truth they will never be ready to hear, chosen one. Even after everything starts falling into place exactly the way it's supposed to, what's already in motion for them isn't a single event. It isn't one bad day they can recover from with an apology and a fresh start. It's the beginning of a much longer unraveling, because debts this size don't get settled in one clean payment. They get paid down slowly, piece by piece, in ways that keep reminding them exactly why the bill came due in the first place. They crossed you believing it was a small moment that would disappear into the background of both your lives. Instead, it became the first domino in a sequence they set in motion themselves, with their own choices, their own lies, their own overconfidence. Every chapter you've walked through in this story, the storm they underestimated, the debt they forgot was growing, the lies stacking into evidence, the circle quietly pulling away, all of it points to the same conclusion. This isn't random misfortune landing on them out of nowhere. This is the natural, unavoidable result of what they set into motion the day they decided you were safe to cross. Picture someone standing at the very edge of a landslide they triggered themselves, watching the first few rocks tumble down and thinking it's already over, not realizing the real weight hasn't even started moving yet. What they're feeling right now, the unease, the strain, the small failures piling up, that's just the first loose stone. The mountain behind it is still coming, and mountains don't announce their arrival, they just arrive. Will you ever get an apology out of any of this? Maybe, maybe not. And chosen one, here's the part worth sitting with. It was never going to matter either way. This was never about what they say when it finally catches up to them. It was always about what happens on its own, whether they ever find the words or not. Some people never apologize even when the entire world can see exactly what they did. That's not a flaw in the system, chosen one. That's simply not the point of this. An apology was never the outcome you were waiting on. Balance was. And balance doesn't require their permission, their honesty, or their willingness to admit anything at all. It arrives regardless, in its own form, on its own schedule, whether or not they ever say the words you might have once hoped to hear. And you, chosen one, you don't have to do a single thing to make sure it arrives. You already did the only thing that ever mattered. You stayed calm, you stayed clean, you let the debt grow instead of forcing an early, incomplete settlement. Karma was never in a hurry, and now you understand why. It was building something they'll never be able to talk their way out of, and it was never going to need your help to deliver it. So here's where we close it, chosen one. Not with anger, not with noise, just with the calm certainty of someone who already knows how this ends. They crossed you, thinking it would cost them nothing. It's about to cost them everything they built, on the assumption that you'd stay quiet forever. You don't need to watch it happen up close. You don't need to explain it to anyone, or defend the fact that you saw it coming. Just keep living exactly the way you have been, clean, steady, untouched by their chaos, and let the debt finish collecting itself. Everything you've walked through today, the storm they didn't see forming, the lies stacking into evidence, the circle quietly stepping back, the ground shifting under a life they thought was solid, none of it needed you to lift a single finger. That's the part they'll never understand about people like you. You were never waiting for revenge. You were just living your life honestly, while the truth did what truth always eventually does on its own. If this message hit exactly where it needed to, drop 77 one more time in the comments. Hit like, subscribe so the next chosen one finds this exact message right when they need it, and share it with someone who's still wondering if crossing them will really cost anything. It will. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.